The emergency room at Parkside General Hospital was bustling as usual, with nurses rushing between patients and doctors buried in charts. Dr. Ethan Bradley, one of the senior physicians, strode through the chaos with an air of confidence. His white coat was pristine, his manner efficient, and his reputation impeccable, or so it seemed. Dr. Bradley had spent years building his career, but beneath his polished demeanor lurked biases that he rarely questioned. He believed himself to be a man of reason, but in truth, his judgments were often clouded by deep-seated prejudices he refused to confront. It was a cold, rainy afternoon when a young boy, no older than 10, was rushed into the ER. His skin was ashen, his small frame trembling with fever. His mother, a woman in her early 30s, clung to him desperately, her face etched with worry. "Please," she begged the nurse at the front desk, "my son is burning up. He can't breathe properly. I need someone to see him right away." The nurse nodded, guiding the boy and his mother to a curtained-off area. A few moments later, she approached Dr. Bradley, who was reviewing a patient's chart. "Dr. Bradley," she said, "we've got a young boy in room 3, high fever, had trouble breathing. His mother says it started suddenly." Dr. Bradley barely looked up. "What's his name?" "Marcus Henderson," the nurse replied. Dr. Bradley's lips tightened at the mention of the last name. He glanced toward room 3, where he could see the worried mother pacing. "I'm swamped right now," he said curtly. "Get someone else to handle it." The nurse hesitated. "You're the attending physician, doctor. The others are tied up with critical cases." Dr. Bradley sighed, his irritation evident. "Fine," he muttered, snapping the chart shut. He strode into room 3, his expression neutral, but his tone cold. "What seems to be the problem?" The mother, relief flashing in her eyes at the sight of a doctor, began to explain. "He woke up this morning with a fever, and then it got worse. Now he's struggling to breathe." Dr. Bradley cut her off, his tone brusque. "Does he have any underlying conditions, asthma, allergies?" "No," the mother said, her voice trembling. "He's usually healthy." Dr. Bradley glanced at Marcus, who was coughing weakly on the exam table. His gaze lingered for a moment before he turned back to the mother. "I'll order some tests," he said dismissively. "But honestly, you should have brought him in sooner. Neglecting symptoms like this is irresponsible." The mother's face flushed, her hands clenching into fists. "I came as soon as I noticed something was wrong," she said, her voice low but steady. Dr. Bradley ignored her, jotting down notes on his clipboard. "Wait here," he said curtly, turning to leave. As he walked out, one of the nurses approached him. "Doctor," she said in a hushed tone, "the boy's vitals are unstable. He needs immediate attention." Dr. Bradley frowned. "Then stabilize him," he said. "Run a chest X-ray, give him fluids, and monitor him. I'll check back later." The nurse hesitated. "Doctor, with all due respect, he needs more than that. Should we call a specialist?" Dr. Bradley waved her off. "It's probably a minor pleural infection. There's no need to overreact." Minutes later, the boy's condition worsened. His breathing became labored, his fever climbing higher. The mother burst out of the room, pleading with anyone who would listen. "Help my son! He's getting worse!" she cried. The commotion caught the attention of another doctor, Dr. Patel, who was just finishing with another patient. She rushed over to assess the situation, her sharp instincts immediately picking up on the severity. "Get me his chart," Dr. Patel barked, her voice cutting through the noise. She glanced at the mother, her expression kind but firm. "I'll take care of him." As Dr. Patel worked to stabilize Marcus, a low murmur spread through the ER. A man had just entered, a tall, imposing figure in a tailored suit. His presence commanded immediate respect, and whispers of recognition rippled among the staff. "Isn't that—" one nurse began, her voice trailing off. "It is," another confirmed, her eyes wide. The man strode toward room 3, his sharp gaze taking in the scene. Dr. Bradley froze when he saw him, a chill running down his spine. "Mr. Henderson!" Dr. Bradley stammered. Mr. Henderson's piercing gaze locked on to Dr. Bradley. Tension in the air was palpable as he strode up to the nervous doctor. This man wasn't just any visitor. He was Jonathan Henderson, prominent civil rights attorney whose name carried weight across the nation. "My son," Jonathan said, his voice calm but steely, "is in that room struggling to breathe, and from what I gather, you've been neglecting his care." Dr. Bradley swallowed hard, his face paling. I wouldn't say neglect," he stammered. "I was following protocol. I've ordered tests," and Jonathan cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Protocol! Protocol doesn't excuse ignoring a child in distress, and it certainly doesn't excuse your attitude toward his mother when she was begging for help." The staff around them had fallen silent, watching the confrontation with wide eyes. Dr. Bradley felt sweat beading on his brow as Jonathan continued. "I've spent my career fighting against people who think they can treat others as less than human because of their race, their background, or their circumstances," Jonathan said, his voice growing more intense. "And it's clear to me that your biases have no place in this hospital or any medical institution." Dr. Bradley opened his mouth to protest, but Jonathan wasn't finished. "My son is 10 years old," he said, his voice softening slightly but losing none of its power. "He loves reading about space, building model rockets, and playing soccer. He's a bright, kind, and resilient kid. But right now, he's scared and struggling for air while you sit here debating whether he's worth your time." Jonathan stepped closer, his imposing presence making Dr. Bradley shrink back. "If anything happens to him because of your negligence, I promise you, you will be held accountable in ways you can't even imagine." Inside the room, Dr. Patel worked tirelessly to stabilize Marcus. She ordered oxygen, intravenous fluids, and a chest X-ray, calm demeanor reassuring the panicked mother. "He's in good hands," Dr. Patel told her. "We'll do everything we can to help him." The mother nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. Jonathan entered the room moments later, his stern expression softening when he saw his son. "Hey, buddy," he said, kneeling beside the bed. Marcus's eyes fluttered open, a faint smile crossing his face despite his labored breathing. "Dad," he murmured weakly. Jonathan took his hand, squeezing it gently. "You're going to be okay," he said firmly. "I'm right here." Meanwhile, Dr. Bradley stood frozen in the hallway, grappling with the gravity of the situation. The reality of who Marcus's father was had hit him like a freight train, but deeper than that was the dawning realization of his own failure, not just as a doctor, but as a human being. For years, he had let his prejudices shape his actions, justifying them with thin excuses and a false sense of superiority. But now, confronted with the undeniable truth of his shortcomings, he felt a deep shame he couldn't ignore. Taking a shaky breath, Dr. Bradley stepped into room 3. He hesitated at the doorway, his gaze falling on Marcus, who looked so small and vulnerable on the hospital bed. "I'd like to help," he said quietly. Dr. Patel glanced up from the monitor, her expression unreadable. "We've got it under control," she said curtly, turning back to her work. Jonathan's eyes flicked to Dr. Bradley, his stare cold and assessing. "Why the sudden change of heart, doctor?" he asked, his tone dripping with irony. Dr. Bradley looked down, his voice barely audible. I made a mistake," he admitted. "Terrible mistake, and I'd like to make it right, if I can." Jonathan studied him for a long moment, then nodded toward Dr. Patel. "It's up to her," he said. Dr. Patel hesitated, then sighed. "Fine," she said. "If you're serious about helping, start by taking over the charting and making sure the lab rushes the results. And don't get in my way." "Yes, doctor," Dr. Bradley said, his voice humbled. As the hours passed, the team worked together to stabilize Marcus. Slowly, his condition began to improve. His breathing eased, and his fever started to come down. Jonathan stayed by his son's side the entire time, his presence a constant source of comfort. The mother sat beside him, her hand never leaving Marcus's. Dr. Bradley, for his part, worked quietly but diligently, following every instruction from Dr. Patel without hesitation. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose beyond his ego, a genuine desire to help, not for recognition or pride, but because it was the right thing to do. By the end of the day, Marcus was resting peacefully, his breathing steady. Dr. Patel smiled as she reviewed the latest vitals. "He's going to be okay," she said, turning to the family. The mother broke down in tears, hugging her son tightly. Jonathan closed his eyes, his relief palpable. Dr. Bradley stood at the edge of the room, unsure of what to say. Finally, he stepped forward, addressing the mother and Jonathan directly. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice heavy with sincerity, "for the way I treated you, for the time I wasted, and for the harm I caused. I can't take it back, but I hope you'll let me make amends." Jonathan looked at him for a long time before speaking. "Apologies are a start," he said, "but actions matter more. If you truly want to make amends, prove it through what you do next, not just for us, but for everyone who comes through these doors." Dr. Bradley nodded, the weight of Jonathan's words settling over him. "I will," he promised. The experience left an indelible mark on Dr. Bradley. From that day forward, he made a conscious effort to confront his biases and treat every patient with the dignity and respect they deserve. It wasn't an easy journey, but it was one he committed to wholeheartedly. As for Marcus, he recovered fully and continued to dream of building rockets and exploring the stars. His family's strength and resilience served as a testament to the power of love and determination, even in the face of prejudice. And in the quiet moments of his career, Dr. Bradley would often think back to that day, a reminder of the lesson he had learned the hard way and the promise he had made to be better.